I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. The winter transfer period throughout most of Europe closed last week, and on today's show, we're going to discuss which U.S. internationals made the best and worst moves of the window. And to help me with that, I've invited Seth Vertelny to join the show today. Seth is the managing editor at Pro Soccer Wire. Seth, welcome to the show.
Hey, Frank, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So most of the windows closed last week. We've had about a week to process things. When you look at the winter transfer window for U.S. internationals, who's someone that stands out to you as having a really good window?
Yeah, there's a few guys I think that seem to have put themselves in a really good spot. And we do, like you said, have a little bit of information in terms of how the early parts of their transfers have gone. So it's a little bit easier to grade some of these. One guy that stands out to me is James Sands. He was in Europe a couple of years ago at Rangers. It was a up and down kind of time for him, and went back to NYCFC at the end of his time at Rangers, and then it kind of seemed like that was going to be the end for him in terms of at least going to Europe in the short to medium term. But instead, he's managed to get this move to the Bundesliga with St. Pauli, and in the early going, he's been able to establish himself as an important player. He's been starting their last few games. Sands has been kind of in and out of the U.S. national team picture. He's been mostly out over the last year or two. But that's the kind of move that I think is going to give him as good of a chance as any to get back in the picture. Another one to the Bundesliga is John Tolkien. Also, going from MLS to the Bundesliga. He's at Holstein Kiel, which it's an interesting move because it's a risk. Holstein Kiel is very much in danger of relegation, but he's going to have a half season to get some experience in the Bundesliga. Much like Sands has kind of established himself as a starter quickly, and so that's a move that I think could really end up working out for him. Even if there is a relegation at the end of the season, maybe he's done enough to earn a move to another team. But definitely a move that's going to be worth following.
Yeah, well, those are the two guys I had really picked out as well. I like the John Tolkien move because we've been talking about him as one of these younger MLS players that could move to Europe for a couple of seasons now. It was good to see him kind of make that move. And I look at Aiden Morris as kind of an example of somebody, who that went really well for, in last winter transfer. It was summer. I think that he moved over to from Columbus Crew to Middlesbrough. And I mean, shortly after that, it seemed like his USMNT career really started to trend upwards. He became a regular part of the team. He seems to be like in the mix now. And so, I think maybe John Tolkien has put himself in a position to maybe he could see that upward trend as well. I mean, he plays in a position, left back where there's a need for the U.S. men's national team, not as a starter, but like as Anthony Robinson's backup. I mean, there's been a lot of kind of people trying to fill that role, for a while. I'm thinking of the Christopher Lund, for example, and I think he put himself in a good position to help his USMNT chances. And then, like you said, James Sands, he's a guy I thought, when he came back to MLS, probably was going to stay there. But I like that he's kind of bet on himself and kind of put himself in a position with that loan where he's back over there. And he also is a player that I know it's a long shot probably for him to make the team, but he can play center back, he can play midfield, so he has that flexibility. And center back and defensive midfield is a need. I mean, I know Tyler Adams is playing well right now, but with his injury history, you can never have too many more defensive-minded, midfielders, in the mix. So good call on that one. Well, what about the opposite end of the spectrum? A U.S. international who maybe made a disappointing move.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's completely disappointing, but seeing Luca De La Torre go from La Liga to MLS, just in that sense, when you kind of put it that way, is a little bit disappointing. He was able to get regular minutes at Celta Vigo for the first couple of years that he was there, and he seemed to be kind of really getting a foothold. And then this season has been really tough for him. A new coach came in, and clearly De La Torre wasn't in his plans. So I think De La Torre had to get out. It was clear that Celta Vigo wasn't a place where he was going to be able to really get consistent minutes. Could he have found another move in Europe? Perhaps. But, on a personal level, you can see the appeal of going to San Diego FC. It's his hometown. It's chance to get regular minutes, guaranteed. And, Mauricio Pochettino has kind of indicated that he is willing, perhaps more willing than Greg Berhalter, to give MLS players a chance to be part of the mix in his player pool. I think that remains to be seen whether he actually will live up to that, or he's just kind of saying that to give an indication to all the players in this pool that they have a shot. But yeah, I think for De La Torre going from La Liga to MLS at age 26, not ideal. And then another one maybe wasn't really too high on the radar, but it was an interesting one to me, was Gavin Beavers, a 19-year-old goalkeeper who has been getting time with Real Salt Lake over the last couple of years, going to Brøndby in Denmark. I think it's a long-term play for him, but he's going from a situation in MLS where he was getting minutes and he had the chance to play. And now in Denmark, he's going to be probably a backup reserve team goalkeeper. And so we'll have to see how that works out. But in the short term, he's trading the opportunity to play first team minutes for the situation where he's probably not going to have that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, the De La Torre one was interesting. I mean, he's kind of an interesting player because he was, when you look at pre-Pochettino in the Berhalter days, De La Torre was a player that got called into every camp. I mean, he didn't play much, but you didn't really think much about whether he was going to get called in or not. He was always there. Then with the injuries, the lack of playing time at Celta Vigo, I don't think he's been called in at all under Pochettino. And so he must be feeling a lot of, very outside looking in at this point, because he was a regular part of the team. Now he maybe hasn't even met with the new coach, in person at all. So, yeah, I was a little surprised for that one. Also because he's made some really negative comments about MLS before. I should have tried to pull up the quote so that I could read it here during the podcast, but it was something around like he thought MLS was almost like a different sport than playing like football in Europe, because they don't have promotion relegation, they don't have the pressure that they have over there. So he's been really negative about MLS before, and so to see him have to kind of eat those words, I wonder if he's like, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, but if he like feels a little awkward, about all of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny too, because in Europe he's been in relegation battles for the last couple years. In the Netherlands, he did get relegated. Then he went to Spain and almost got relegated. So he's just been on teams that have been in that situation. And now in MLS, we'll see how San Diego ends up looking in their first season. But at least on paper, they might struggle as well. And so thankful that he's not in a relegation battle in MLS, but we'll have to see how it kind of plays out with San Diego.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he has a long road ahead of him to get back into the national team, but we'll see. I think he's a good player, and I hope things go well for him, at San Diego. One of a guy I had picked out other than De La Torre as being, I was a little disappointed in his move, was a Jack McGlynn. He got traded from Philadelphia Union to Houston Dynamo, and I was just disappointed because he was a player I was hoping would make the move to Europe, somewhere, kind of like John Tolkien did in this winter transfer period, because he's just another young guy you always think about when you think of young MLS rising stars who are looking to make their next move. And I really saw the next move for him being somewhere in Europe versus just another MLS team. Maybe just a change of scenery will give him the chance to prove it, that he can do it at another club and maybe be the man, at that club. What were your thoughts on his move?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been sort of conflicting reporting out there as to whether there were interested teams in Europe and whether they were willing to pay as much as Houston did, which ended up being $2.1 million. If McGlynn wanted to go to Europe and the union prevented him from going, I think that's kind of difficult for him. It's going to be tough for him to swallow. It does seem like maybe the market wasn't quite there the way that maybe we would have expected, and that's why he's still in MLS at a different team. Um, Certainly, the Dynamo appear to be a better fit for his style of play, which I think is going to be a positive for him. And it's not so up and down the way that Philly is. It is a little bit more of a controlled possession based style, which of course kind of suits the kind of player that he is. He's still only 21, so I think you could see, best case scenario, he ends up playing a year or two at Houston, does well, boosts his stock more, and then he does still end up making a move to Europe in a year or two, and he's still only 22, 23 years old. But yeah, certainly a player who's expressed interest in going to Europe and looks ready for a move, maybe not to like a big club in a big league, but certainly like a Eredivisie or Liga or something like that. So we'll have to see how it plays out in Houston. But yeah, overall, I think it could work out for him in the long term, but he might be a little disappointed in the short term.
Yeah, and I still think he's in a good place with Pochettino, probably because he had that really good January camp, scoring that amazing goal, and so he's on his radar. It's just maybe his the I don't know, the timeline for him moving into the national team maybe is a little bit slower than if he had found a way to get to Europe. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm just kind of like speculating a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it goes back again to what I was saying about Pochettino's views on MLS players. Is he willing to call in MLS players ahead of European based options, and maybe they're at the same level? Maybe the MLS players getting a little bit more playing time. We'll have to see because over the last couple of years, this team has shifted to being almost entirely European based when everyone's available.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we'll get our first taste of how willing he is to do that in this March Nations League camp. I'm thinking about striker position, especially with so many guys injured. That seems like a position where he could bring in 1 to 2 strikers, from MLS. I'm thinking of a Brandon Vasquez, a Patrick Ajuman. There's always a center back positions that, there seems to be a lot of players in that pool of center backs, but no dominant people who have just like taken over the role. So will he bring some center backs from MLS? I mean, he just had the January camp. These players are going to be fresh on his mind. There seems to be some openings available for new players to come into camp. Will he kind of follow through on his word there and actually bring in more MLS players than typical? It's going to be real interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's going to be some direct competition. I think on that roster between MLS and European based options. Like, do you, at center back, like you mentioned, like do you bring in someone like Miles Robinson or Walker Zimmerman from MLS, or do you go for like an up and coming European guy like Nokai Banks from Augsburg? At forward, yeah, like you got Vasquez, you got Ajimang, um, or you have some options in Europe as well, outside of Josh Sargent, who's clearly going to be there. And then, center midfield too. You've got guys like Aiden Morris, Tanner Tessman, who've kind of increased in prominence with the U.S. since they moved to Europe. But then, yeah, like you also have guys like McGlynn and guys like De La Torre who are now in MLS. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about players who have made some moves. What about a U.S. international who stayed put that maybe you think should have made a move in your mind, or you were hoping was going to make a move?
Yeah, I think the winter window saw a lot of U.S. players move, but pretty much all of the big rumored blockbuster moves didn't come to fruition. When you look at the talk around guys like Malik Tillman, Ricardo Pepi, Anthony Robinson, Gio Reyna, none of them moved. And I think probably in all of those cases, it makes sense. Pepe, of course, got injured. Who knows what would have happened with the West Ham bid. It looked like they were really going to make a push for him, and then he got injured, so that didn't happen. Tillman, kind of similar. He got injured, but it didn't look like he was going to go anywhere. Um, I don't know if any of those guys really should have left in the winter. Gio Reyna, his situation continues to be pretty frustrating at Dortmund. He has been making an impact when he gets a chance over the last month or two, but he just hasn't really gotten many opportunities. And when he does, it's off the bench for 10, 15 minutes. But, I think the desire to see him move to another team is a little bit lower for me than it was last year, because we saw how that went with his move to Nottingham Forest. Um, it seems like he's better off just kind of staying put, at least for the rest of this year, and trying to prove himself to a new coach, trying to get more minutes. And then maybe in the summer, he reevaluates his situation. Obviously, he just needs to play, and it just hasn't been happening for him now for like 3 or 4 years. So that's been frustrating to see. Robinson, you can make an argument that he's outgrown Fulham. He's been one of the best left backs in the Premier League for the last year or two. And it wouldn't have been hugely surprising to see him move in the winter window. But he certainly has the ability and the opportunity to do so at the end of this year. The only question with him, I think, is age. He is 27, so maybe not at the age where a team in the top four of the Premier League is going to pay a ton for him, but certainly still in his prime and still has the ability to be one of the best defenders, one of the best left backs in the Premier League for the next 3 or 4 years. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all those, bigger names that you mentioned where we had all these rumors floating around, I think for the most part I was pretty happy that they stayed put. I think Gio Reyna, I think it's just better for him to just kind of ride it out at Dortmund the rest of the season and then just try to find a permanent move in the summer that's like perfect for him, that can just set him up for the season ahead of the World Cup. Same with Anthony Robinson. I think he's likely going to make a move to one of these big clubs, but again, maybe wait till the summer where he can get like the full preseason, kind of get settled in. Pepe, I actually like him, staying at PSV, because I do think he's gonna, you never know with the injury, how much of a setback that's going to be, but all indications are he's going to head into next season as the starter, or at least with every chance to win that starting place at PSV. And if you're the starting striker for PSV, I mean, you're going to get a lot of goals. I mean, you're going to be putting yourself in a really great position to win that striker position with the U.S. men's national team. So I wasn't too disappointed with any of those moves. It was some of the guys on the fringe and maybe some younger guys that I was disappointed or I don't know, was hoping to make a move. And some of these guys I'm going to mention, I know it's probably not even their fault. Maybe the clubs prevented them from making a move. Maybe they still will make a move somewhere. But like, I think of like a Alex Zendejas. I really think that he's had a great season at Club America and Liga MX. I was hoping maybe he could make a move to Europe to see what he could do, over there. Gaga Slonina, he's back at Chelsea, kind of waiting around. His loan from Chelsea to Barnsley was terminated. He's been injured. As far as I know, we're still kind of waiting to see where he's going to go, if he's going to go. But I think right now he's just back at Chelsea's training ground, kind of like waiting around. And then Duncan McGuire's another guy who, he had the whole fiasco last winter with Blackburn falling apart because of paperwork. I just really hoped it would work out for him to maybe go to Blackburn or somewhere else in the championship and kind of like get that move. And now I kind of wonder, did he miss his chance? Did he miss his chance to get to Europe because of like paperwork, and like, is that going to like haunt him? So,
for sure.
I thought for sure he was going to go, just because he seems to have a more limited role with Orlando now, and because it was just so clear that he wanted to go and the club was ready to depart. I mean, were you surprised at all to see him not make a move?
Not really. I think, like you said, it was a weird season for him last year because Orlando City bought his replacement, Luis Muriel, under the assumption that he was going to leave, and then he didn't, and then they were left with kind of a awkward situation where they had two starting nines. So Maguire was productive again. He reached double digit goals for the second straight season, but maybe the market was down for him a little bit. He didn't have a great Olympics, and that was maybe his chance to kind of boost himself onto the radar of some European clubs. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily over for him in terms of a European future, but um, certainly the clock is ticking. He's 24, and he'll have to kind of show again this year that he can earn regular minutes and score goals and hopefully get himself onto the radar of a European club, because the striker pool with the US is pretty deep, and I think probably a move to Europe is what he would need to kind of start challenging those big three guys, the Pepe, the Balogun, um, and the Sargent.
Okay, let me ask you just about a couple other guys that we haven't covered so far. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on them. Leonard Maloney moved from Heidenheim to Mainz, so just a transfer within the Bundesliga. And then Jesus Ferreira got traded from FC Dallas to Seattle. What's your thoughts on those two moves in particular?
Yeah, Maloney is one of those where on paper it seems like a really good move for his career. He's going from a small club in Heidenheim who really punched above their weight last year. Even made they even got into the Europa Conference League, which is incredible for a team that never even been in the Bundesliga. But this year they've really struggled, and so he saw an opportunity to move up to a bigger club, and he was able to do so with Mainz. The question with him at Mainz is how much he's going to be able to play. At Heidenheim, he started pretty much every game, and he's yet to play for Mainz. And so, it's early on, but if he wants to get back into the national team picture, he's going to have to obviously get minutes there and prove that he can be a regular contributor at a team that right now they're pushing for a European place, and they look like one of the stronger clubs in the Bundesliga outside of the big ones, the Bayerns and the Leverkusens. As far as Jesus Ferreira goes, kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Duncan McGuire. Someone who maybe missed their chance to get a European move. He had a tough year last year, and so the market had clearly kind of dried up for him. He had a move to Russia a year or two ago that got nixed by MLS, and that was maybe his chance. And so I don't necessarily think that moving to Seattle was a bad move for him. Clearly, I think he needed a change of scenery. He should be in a system and under a coach where he's productive and scoring goals. Again, this is somebody who Pochettino probably doesn't have immediately in his radar right now, but if he's able to get back to the goal scoring form that he's been able to show pretty consistently throughout his MLS career, definitely he's somebody who could get back in the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, Maloney's a guy that I've been surprised he didn't get called into at least one camp, under Pochettino, just so they could get a look at him. You mean talking about a guy who was, as you said, playing week in, week out in the Bundesliga, in a position where the U.S. has had some need at defensive midfielder with Tyler Adams being gone. So be curious to see what impact that has on his role going forward. And then Ferreira, he seems to be in a tough spot. He has a long road, I think, back into the U.S. men's national team. But yeah, you start banging in goals. I know he showed up at January camp and then had to leave early due to injury or whatnot. So at least he got to meet the coaching staff and make some kind of impression. But hopefully he can get rolling again, with Seattle and start banging in some goals again. Well, Seth, thank you so much for joining the show. I'll make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is at @svertelny, and also to your work at Pro Soccer Wire. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about these transfers with me.
Sure, Frank. Thanks for having me again.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.